593. 593.
Yeah, it's only 3.
Sorry. Didn't mean to say that. I guess I should have moved my belt around more vertically.
There you go. A little white out.
593. Jesus has a table spread where the saints of God are fed. He invites his chosen people, come and dine. With his manna he does feed and supply of every need. Oh, 'tis sweet to sup with Jesus all the time. Come and dine, the Master calls, and come and dine. You may feast at Jesus' table all the time. He who fed the multitude turned the water into wine. To the hungry call him now, come and dine. The disciples came to land, thus obeying Christ come in. For the Master called them, oh come and dine. There they found their heart's desire, bread and fish around the fire. Thus he satisfies the hungry every time. Come and dine, the Master called, and come and dine. You may feast at Jesus' table all the time. He who fed the multitude turned the water into wine. To the hungry call them now, come and dine. Soon the Lamb will take his bride to be ever at his side. All the host of heaven will assemble be. Oh, 'twill be a glorious sight. All the saints as spotless white, and with Jesus they will feast eternally. Come and dine, the Master called, and come and dine. You may feast at Jesus' table all the time. He who fed the multitude turned the water into wine. To the hungry call them now, come and dine. It mentioned manna in there. Can y'all remember any of the interesting qualities of manna?
Never spoiled.
It never spoiled?
No, just the opposite.
No.
You could use double on
One time you did.
one day out of the week.
It was new every day.
It was new every day except for on the Sabbath. That's right. You gathered what you needed for the day. If you tried to store it overnight, normally on the weekdays it would spoil.
Right.
But on the day before the Sabbath, you were supposed to gather twice as much, and it didn't spoil. Yeah. So,
That's what-
but day by day, God's provision day by day. Yeah. In our Sunday school class this morning, I had mentioned that God has to. It just seems like sometimes He just gives me step by step, which is a lot the same type of way. God's giving us enough food for today. But, I have to trust Him for the day after that in doing that. And I always think that's interesting, too, looking back at the Old New Testament from the fact that God, for years, God provided them manna. And how quickly did they forget? And they would go back and, they'd start grumbling about things when that morning they had picked up manna that had been provided to them for the day.
What about those nasty birds?
Yeah.
Flying.
So yeah, grumbling, complaining, just kind of interesting in that. But I can be the same way. I can forget things just as easily on the blessings that God has given me. So as we take time to be thankful, as they were doing this morning, find those things to be thankful and tell somebody the things that you are thankful for and God's daily provision. In that, try and look for some of the things that have become so normal to you that you've probably forgotten about them, and be thankful for them, because there are many of those things as well. So I don't know, just come and dine. All right. Would someone pray for us, and be sure and pray for the meetings that are going on upstairs too, with the other adult class that's going on, and with the I don't know what the teens or the kids are doing. I know there's a variety of things that are going on. Would somebody pray for us tonight? If you're volunteering somebody else, that means you're supposed to. I heard that whisper back there someplace.
Our Father, we thank you for this evening. We thank you for this Thanksgiving time season. And we just ask that you would bless each one of us, help each one of us to step out and invite other people to the cantata and to the Thanksgiving dinner. And we just ask that you would bless this service this evening and be with each one of us the rest of the week and the rest of this month. And in the name we ask. Amen.
Amen. All right. I'm very excited tonight because this is a member of my Sunday school class. And I get to hear. And I've learned little bits and pieces about it, about his story. So I'm excited to hear what he has for us tonight.
No pressure.
No pressure.
No pressure at all.
As chaotic as Sunday school is, there's no pressure in that at all.
Okay, well tonight I'm going to do a devotion on the book of Habakkuk. Habakkuk the prophet, or as I believe you say it here in America, Habakkuk.
That was a good
I will call him Habakkuk, that's what I'm used to. And
Call him what?
Habakkuk.
Okay.
I'm sure by the time I've finished, everybody else will be calling him Habakkuk. But the book of Habakkuk has a special place in my heart. As Polly mentioned before, that I first became a Christian in 1984, at a time when I was seriously ill in hospital and various other things had happened, and spent 3 months in the hospital. It badly interfered with my university course. I was in my final year, had to take the rest of that year off, restarted again in the fall of 1985. Unfortunately, I had another hospital admission, and that totally messed up my course. That had a knock-on effect in the summer of 1986 of me struggling to find a job, struggling with the side effects of the medications that I was on, a very poor degree as well, and that continued for a whole year into the summer of 1987. And then, of course, I was competing against that year's graduates, never mind the graduates from my own year. And by October 86, I joined a non-denominational house group and was put onto a series of devotions by an organisation called Crusade for World Revival, based in London in England. And they did booklets of devotions for 2 months periods at a time. And come to July, August of 1987, they had a 2-month devotion on the book of Habakkuk. And then I was able, after finishing that, to see that God did actually have a purpose for my life. But the things that had gone wrong, he was going to use and had a purpose. And there would be meaning, and that he would move me forwards. So let's have a look in Habakkuk chapter 1. And we're told that Habakkuk had a complaint against God. Things are happening in his nation and the nations around that he was totally and utterly confused about. He could see evil prospering, righteousness being pushed out, and could not see why or how it would end. If we read verse 2, O Lord, how long shall I cry, and you will not hear? Even cry out to you violence, and you will not save. Echoed in Job chapter 21. That's where that quote comes from. Why do you show me iniquity and cause me to see trouble? For plundering and violence are before me. there is strife and contention arises. Therefore the law is powerless, and justice never goes forth. For the wicked surround the righteous, therefore perverse judgment proceeds. I think we can relate to that in this world today, and throughout the whole of human history. I'm sure we can relate to those words exactly. For we look at the news and the situations in the world, and we see evil taking over, righteousness being pushed out. Where is God in all of this? Habakkuk was confused, so he did the right thing by bringing his confusion and his complaint to God. I know people, when bad things happen to them, even people in the church, I've had friends who have questioned God as to, well, where are you? And then they turn around, walk out the door, and they leave God behind. But Habakkuk didn't do that. He went straight to God with his complaint, expecting an answer. And God did answer him. And we read from verse 5 in the first chapter of Habakkuk. Look among the nations and watch. Be utterly astounded, for I will work a work in your days which you would not believe, though it were told you. For indeed, I am raising up the Chaldeans, or Babylonians, a bitter and hasty nation, which marches through the breadth of the earth. This doesn't seem like the sort of answer that Habakkuk would be expecting from God. Let's continue with what God says. Which marches through the breadth of the earth to possess dwellings that are not theirs. They are terrible and dreadful. Their judgment and their dignity proceed from themselves. Their horses are swifter than leopards, and more fierce than evening wolves. Their chargers charge ahead. Their cavalry comes from afar. They fly as an eagle that hastens to eat. They all come for violence. Their faces are set like the east wind. They gather captives like sand. They scoff at kings, and princes are scorned by them. They deride every stronghold, for they heap up mounds of earth and seize it. Then his mind changes, and he transgresses. He commits offence, imputing his power to his God, with a small g. So Habakkuk had looked around and seen in his day violence, persecution, evil, rampant. Takes his request to God, and God answers and gives him an answer that he probably wasn't expecting, and that would have made him even more confused than he was in the first place. But sometimes when we bring things that are troubling us to the Lord and ask for enlightenment on the situation, if we ask for enlightenment, for the light to shine, well, God may well make that light shine on the situation, but it could be such a scorching light that we maybe at times wish we hadn't asked the question in the first place and just trusted God. But in this situation, that's what happened to Habakkuk. Here I see violence, and you're telling me, Lord, that you're going to raise up this brutal nation, the Babylonians, the Chaldeans. They're going to come, commit violence, dwell in dwellings not their own, take over property that isn't theirs, and continue to transgress. I don't understand this. Well, what Habakkuk was said. So, with that in his heart, a total, utter confusion now, he goes back to the Lord Verse 12. Are you not from everlasting? O Lord my God, my Holy One, we shall not die. O Lord, you have appointed them for judgment. O Rock, you have marked them for correction. You are of purer eyes and to behold evil, and cannot look on wickedness. And here is the relationship that Habakkuk has with the Lord. He doesn't just have knowledge of God, but he interacts with God, has dialogue with God, and knows him, that God is a God that cannot tolerate sin, or evil, or transgression. And here is Habakkuk bringing this point to the Lord and saying, well, okay, you're going to raise up this brutal, evil nation. What's the purpose behind it? Why? This is not in your nature to do this. I don't understand. Why do you look on those who deal treacherously and hold your tongue when the wicked devours? One more righteous than he? Why do you make men like fish of the sea, like creeping things that have no ruler over them? They take up all of them with a hook. They catch them in their net and gather them in their dragnet. Therefore they rejoice and are glad. Therefore they sacrifice to their net, burn incense to their dragnet, because by them their share is sumptuous, and their food plenteous. Shall they therefore empty their net and continue to slay nations without pity? Here's Habakkuk reasoning with the Lord. I know you're a righteous, holy God, and yet you're saying that you're going to allow all of this evil to rise up? This isn't like you. What's going on here, God? And at the end of his dialogue with God, chapter 2, verse 1, Habakkuk says to the Lord, I will stand my watch and set myself on the rampart and watch to see what he will say to me and what I will answer when I am reproved. Habakkuk brought his complaint straight to the Lord. Habakkuk was expecting the Lord to respond. And he waited for the Lord. Well, didn't just go about his business. It said that he was on the ramparts, that he was expectantly waiting for the Lord to respond to him and to give him an answer to explain this, because to Habakkuk it just made no sense whatsoever. And indeed, the Lord does respond. But the Lord answered him and said, write down the vision. Well, this was something very important that God was going to do. And it was so important that he got Habakkuk to write it down and make it plain on tablets, that we may run who reads it. The news needed to be spread quickly, for the vision is yet for an appointed time. But at the end it will speak, and it will not lie. Though it tarries, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry. Here the Lord is reassuring Habakkuk that, yes, I understand your complaint. I am going to do something about this situation. In my time. You wait. It will come. Verse 4 of chapter 2. Behold the proud. His soul is not upright in him, for the just shall live by faith. Indeed, because he transgresses by wine, he is a proud man. And he does not stay at home, because he enlarges his desires as hell, and he is like death and cannot be satisfied. He gathers to himself all nations, and heaps up for himself all peoples. Shall not all these take up a proverb against him, and a taunting riddle against him, saying, Woe to he who increases what is not his, how long? Now we can see things starting to turn around. And to him who loads himself with many pledges, will not your creditors rise up suddenly? Will they not awaken who oppress you? And you will become their booty. Yes, the Lord is going to raise up the Chaldeans. The purpose was to discipline his own people, the Jewish nation. But the fact that the Lord is allowing them to commit these evil atrocities does not mean that they will be exempt from judgment or punishment for what they do. Rather, the opposite. And here, as we go through the second chapter, the Lord is now making it clear to Habakkuk what is happening. That he's disciplining the Jewish nation to make them turn back to him. And that the Chaldeans, well, they will be overtaken by another evil race. And they will face judgment for what they have done. And now, as we read a little bit further along, you can maybe do that later at home. It's a bit on the long side to read all tonight. But Habakkuk then goes from his confused state to a state of confidence. And Gail's very kindly editing my autobiography at the time when I was first taken into hospital in 1984 and to the early 90s. And the title I gave it when I first started writing it in 88 was From Confusion to Confidence. But it was this whole book, going through it in 2 months in some detail, that changed my whole perspective on my life. Interesting that we've been doing Joseph in the morning services, and that's another character that I can really relate to. As we saw today during Sean's sermon, that Joseph, when he was reconciled to his brothers, was saying that God sent me ahead of you so that I may save my own family and my own nation. And that God, I'm sure, has put me through experiences that times when I've been praying over the last 10 years or so, I felt the Lord saying that experiences and the hardships and struggles that I've been through have been training for the task that I want you to do in the future. And that's very comforting. On Thursday night, we were at the Salvation Army, and one of those rare occasions where I abandoned the sermon and we had the time of sharing and testimony and praying and ministering to some of the people there. And we were short on numbers, but as time progressed, we started with 2 and we ended up with 10 people there by about 7:30. And one of the guys there was praying, and he was saying that there was some quite deep, difficult situations that one or two of the people there were going through. And he said that, I love this quote, your story is your testimony. That no matter what you've done in the past, what you've been through, that is your story, and God will use it. So just to sum up for the lessons I think we can learn through Habakkuk. We're confused. We don't know what God's doing. We see situations and well, this isn't really compatible with a holy, righteous God. Or just tragedy after tragedy can strike us and we're at our wits' end trying to make any sense of it. Bring it to the Lord. Don't just run away and say, I'm done with you, God. Because God knows the beginning, the middle, and the end. Bring it to the Lord. and he will answer you. But the answer that he might give you at that point of time for what you need may well make you even more anxious and confused than you already were. But that's the dialogue, the relationship that we have with the Lord. I remember when I was reading these devotions back in 1987, one day the writer was telling the story of somebody who was very angry with God for the things that had happened in his life. And he literally ranted and raved at God for a whole 2 hours. And after 2 hours, he was silent. But he did let the Lord speak, and the Lord said, "You wouldn't let anybody else speak to you like that for 2 hours, would you? But I am God. I am bigger than all these things. I can take it." So be honest with the Lord and go to him in prayer, but also to listen. And then, if the answers were still confused, still not making sense, just to go back to the Lord, to wait for him to explain and to answer your concerns, and expect an answer. And that is where the relationship with God comes in. It's not just us talking to him, but him talking to us. But as Proverbs said, he has plans to make us prosper, not to harm us. But ultimately, his purposes are for our own good. In chapter 3, once Habakkuk has had everything explained and he understands, he gives the time over to worship and praise and prayer. We may well be going through a transition period for our church, and we may well be confused and as to exactly what the Lord is doing with us and will do with us. Let's go to him in prayer, expect an answer and a vision. He will provide it. May the Lord be with us all, now and forevermore. Amen.
Amen.